Yeah, so thanks everyone for joining today. As I said, we're going to be talking about behavioral pricing. It's a topic with a lot of mystique around it. A lot of people are quite preoccupied with trying to find out how you can quantify some of these effects, and hopefully we'll shed some light to get from anecdote to evidence today. And yeah, let me just introduce myself. Paul, head of sales. I used to work in consulting and now working to scale the Buynomics sales team. And Ingo, our founder, he founded Buynomics, has 12 years experience in pricing, and he will guide you through the session today. Would you like to quickly go to our short company intro? So just to give you the gist of what Buynomics does, we are one of the few solutions that is aimed at really solving all global top-line challenges in a holistic manner. So not just the pricing, not just the discounting, not just the product optimization, but really everything in one. And that's, I think, where we see a lot of really tangible benefit for clients. Very high forecast accuracy makes for better decisions with high average return on sales. And you can get insights within minutes thanks to really scalable software. But enough of that. Ingo, I think if you want to start with the content today, the next slide will be more interesting to our viewers.
Yeah, I very much hope so. All right, so let's first of all, thanks Paul for the introduction, and thanks to all of you for taking the time for this webinar. And I very much hope that we're delivering value that makes it worth for you spending the 30 minutes on the topic. Yeah, so let's jump right into it. If you have any questions or you have something also maybe that we don't have in the presentation, but that you find interesting and you would like us to give an answer to on this subject matter, then just write it into the chat or the questions, and we will answer it at the end of the session. I think in one of the last webinars we had like 15 or 20 minutes Q&A extra at the end, so we have time. So, and we're prepared to answer all questions that you send us. All right, so what's the topic today? The topic today is behavioral pricing, and what makes this special is the fact, of course, that we are all human. And so we, on the one hand, have an understanding of the phenomenon. We know how difficult it is to be rational. But on the other hand, as pricing professionals, it's something that's not so easy to deal with. So and we will go into that in some more detail. There are good reasons why in economics they usually work with the assumption of full rationality and so on, because that makes the tools easier, and essentially all of the tools that we have in pricing, like price elasticity, also largely the way it's used, value pricing, are at least implicitly built on the assumption of rationality. And there are good reasons for that. It's much easier to calculate if rationality is assumed than when you are working with the Paul called it mysterious ways of irrationality in some ways. I think, and we often start with this slide here on irrationality, is if you look at the two errors, and that's a very simple example, you know, and I tell you, and I think if you measure it, you will see that the two errors have same length, but it's very difficult to actually see that because of the way our brain is working. So, and even if I tell you and you know that the two errors are of the same length, it's very difficult to see that. And this is something that's very important for behavioral pricing. That means that even if you know that something is the case, so for example, that 10 euros and 9.99 is essentially the same, it's very, very difficult for us to act accordingly, to treat 9.99 and 10 euros essentially the same, and that's the core of it. And that's also why even if people know that certain behavioral tricks are being played in pricing, it's very, very difficult to ignore them and be actually rational. They can do it by applying some tools, some strict rules, or having not making a decision themselves, but delegating the decision to some Excel decision support tool that they built. There are ways to deal with that, but it's in general, and particularly if, I don't know, if you're in a store and you're making quick decisions, it's very, very difficult to ignore these behavioral effects that drive our decisions. So what are they? To get started, I think nothing new, but it's important to set the stage for what we will be dealing with later. We need to understand what the difference is between Homo economicus, so the rational person, and the Homo sapiens, what essentially all of us are. And the difference is, of course, it's already in the name. Homo economicus is rational, so it has strict rules by which decisions are made, and essentially if the conditions are the same, a rational person will always come to the same conclusion. For humans, of course, that is not the case, because we often work with very simple heuristics, something like anchoring, or we just look at one or two properties of a product to make a decision and ignore all the rest, taking shortcuts to come to fast conclusions. These are the traits of the Homo sapiens. There are good evolutionary reasons for that, to simplify decision making, but there are also these shortcuts. They have some downsides, and some of these can be exploited in behavioral pricing, and this is what we will be talking about today. So I think on the side of the effects that exist, we will not tell you anything new. I think there's a very broad literature on the broader field of behavioral economics, and also a growing literature on the more specific topic of behavioral pricing that cover all of the key effects. And I think to a large extent, these are known. What we are contributing today, and what our focus will be, is getting from these specific effects, like a price threshold, or the fact that customers prefer a middle option, how to actually use that in day-to-day decision making or in price optimization. That will be the focus of us here today, and I think this is also where we can deliver significant value over the status quo, because it seems to me that much of the work that's done, and I've seen, not only read quite a number of books, but also seen many presentations, is that the way it's presented, it's essentially, it's very often just a collection of individual effects that are interesting themselves, but it's then, so what do you actually do with some of these effects? And this is what we want to highlight here with one specific example that I guess I would suppose that most of you are familiar with. So, and this is the pricing example, the famous wine bottle. So the situation, just to summarize, and then we will go into the details and use that example to highlight what we think is the next big step in behavioral pricing. So following situations, you have a two product case, you have two wine bottles, A and B is not only more expensive, but is also the better wine. So we have a good wine, a better wine, and there's still room on the next slide for the best wine. And you see, given these prices and given these bottles, in this case, 60% will buy the cheaper price, 40% will buy the more expensive price. And the behavioral explanation for that is, if it's difficult for people to judge the quality and make a good decision, they tend to go for the cheaper one in this case, because they, well, 30 euros is actually pretty expensive, so a bit more than half will go for the cheaper one. If we then add, and this is again is a famous example in pricing, add a third bottle, so essentially the best wine at 50 euros more expensive than the two other bottles. This essentially serves as a decoy, and now the middle option looks reasonable to the Homo sapiens. And what happens is that previously we had 60%, 40%, that the share of customers who go for the middle option it actually increases. That's something that wouldn't happen to a rational decision maker. If you prefer A over B, you wouldn't change your mind between A and B by when a third option C in this case is added. So this is clearly irrational behavior. It actually violates one of the axioms underlying behavioral economics, or the rationality in behavioral economics, and that's something that shouldn't happen, but it is, and this is confirmed in a number of experiments. And I think that's where, with this curiosity, many of the presentations on behavioral economics or behavioral pricing stop. And this is interesting, but I think for the pricing professional, the obvious question is, so how do I work with this? What does that mean for my work? How can I use this in my day-to-day pricing? And is, for example, 10, 30, 50, are these the best prices? Or can I use this effect, maybe go to 70 or maybe only to 40 to optimize my pricing in this situation? So, and to do that, I think it makes sense to go back half a step and look at the difference between Homo economicus and Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens, we've already seen how Homo sapiens decides in this case. So 36% go for A, 59 for B, and 5% for C. And we will come later why that's what we observed. And if we have a rational person, and remember they started with 60% in the two bottle case, with 60-40. In this case, what would happen is that some of the customers that bought bottle A previously and some of the customers that went for bottle B now buy bottle C. So you would have a distribution like this, and this is what would happen with an underlying utility model of Homo economicus for a rational person. So not too different for C, but the main difference is here between A and B, where what we said before, and this is the irrational part. The fact that bottle C appeared pulled some customers from A to B, right? And this minus 19 plus 22 minus 3, that's the behavioral effect, and that's the effect that's essentially the irrational addition to the rational model. And this is what once we have identified this additional effect, we can actually use it for our price optimization. So to explain the previous model, I think it's important to understand, and this is what we're doing here, is how the rational person decides. So the rational person typically, in the rational model, uses something like willingness to pay or utility, and usually you have a decreasing marginal utility when you add quality. In this case, it's not wine. We use something more more ordered here. And the example comes from telcos. So you have data volume, for example, in a mobile plan in gigabyte. And if you increase the data volume you can spend on your plan, your willingness to pay, the average willingness to pay of people here increases. And a utility model like this is underlying the behavior and the decisions of the Homo economicus. And this you can be estimated based on data, on actual sales data, or data that comes from conjoint analyses and so on. And remember, typically a conjoint also doesn't pick up these behavioral effects. If you use a conjoint model that is based on utilities, then you're also in essence assuming a rational model in most cases. So this is what you would pick up in most of these models. And this gives you the behavior of a rational person. What I would like to do is, and this is for something that can be done in the software that we are building here at Buynomics that Paul mentioned in the beginning, is, and I want to use this example to highlight this model, is to show how to actually work with these different effects using this example here. Paul, can you see my browser now?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. So this is our software. That there might be others. I haven't seen them yet, but this is something that we can do in our software. And essentially, what this is here is the wine example that we just showed. We put into the software with essentially the way that we explain it. So there's an underlying rational model, and on top we can add behavioral effects here. So we have the two wine qualities. We have a good wine, a better wine, a best wine, and we can add or tell the model that it behaves like real people or it doesn't behave like real people. So these are the building blocks that we can work with. And essentially we have here the three wines, just as in the presentation. We have a good wine, a better wine, a best wine. And in the first case, we will show our in our model virtual customers. So they are a replica of real customer. They behave just like real customer. And the good thing about these virtual customers that we have in our solution is you can essentially tell them to behave rational, or you can tell them to behave irrationally. So you can turn on and off these behavioral effects. And this allows us to actually see the difference and of these behavioral effects and how, if they apply in a situation, how that affects sales, and of course how that also affects your profitability, your revenue, and you can actually use it to optimize your offer. So in this case, we have to finalize this, we have these two products in here. We have costs for our different wines, so it's 4, 15, 30 euros. We have the prices that we also showed in the tool, 10 and 30 and 50. And we have different price points at which we might offer the wine to our customers. And let's see what these virtual customers would do in this case. So we showed them these two wine bottles, 10 and 30 euros, and we told them not to behave irrationally. So they are just making decisions like the Homo Economicus, just based on their preferences. And we see that we have here the 40-60 market share between the two wines. We also see that, for example, that this is not the profit optimum. So we're only at 92% of the profit optimum. We are at 2/3 of the revenue optimum. So we're far away from the revenue optimum, but we are, I would say, close to the profit optimum. Profit optimum would be here at 10 and 26. If we now show the third option, the best wine, to these virtual shoppers, then we see, and they're still behaving like rational people. We see that we have here the 37, 7 or 8, and 55%, exactly the numbers that we also showed in the presentation. So here these are still behaving rationally. And we see in this case 90%, so we're about 10% below the profit optimum. Just for your information, you can also look at these individual products, have demand functions for them. You can see how these products affect sales. So all of them are a bit too expensive here, the good wine and the better wine, too expensive for their overall profit optimum. And you see that we have, I don't know, price elasticities around -3. Here, this one's a bit more elastic, -5. The best one's very elastic, -10. This is because if we change prices, most of these virtual shoppers, so if we make the best wine more expensive, many will go from this wine to the better wine, for example. So we have all the transparency that we need, and now what we do is we tell these virtual shoppers to behave like real people. So they have this middle preference, and we see that in this case we have, as in the model, the 36, 59, and 5% here, as we had in the presentation. So we now have more of these shoppers go to the middle option rather than the good wine, the cheapest wine. Again, here we see that we are, in this case, we're closer to the optimum. So if people are behaving like real people, we're actually not too far away from the profit optimum. And this allows us to see that. So if people overnight become rational, then we would, in this case, have to change the prices of our products. All right, and just to summarize what we just talked about, so we have here these cases. So in the 2-bottle case, we see that most buy the good product, about 2/3, 1/3, the better. In the 3-bottle case, we see that some customers here are going for the best wine, and in this case here, where people are behaving rationally, we see that this large increase in customers buying the better wine. So, in summary, this allows you to actually work with these behavioral effects. The middle option that we just displayed is just one of many, and of course, this is still more of a toy example to highlight these effects. But of course, in this solution here, you can use these behavioral effects like promotions, different types of promotions, for example, in a real life example with the actual number of products and also the complexity of your real sales situation to optimize your portfolio, to optimize your pricing, considering these behavioral effects. So this is something that also allows you to go from the toy example that highlights just the specific effect, the middle option in this case, to something that actually helps you optimize your real pricing challenges. All right, so this was just a quick highlight of how to actually work with these behavioral effects. Now I need to get back to the presentation. Paul, do you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
That's very good. But I can't see my mouse. I can't see. My mouse is gone. No. Okay. All right. So as we said, so this was one specific example, like the middle option, or in this case here, also like a default notch when you recommend a certain product to your customers. And we just put together here the main effects that we're seeing in our work, and all of these effects can be modeled in this solution, for example, and can be used to actually optimize your pricing. So I would say what we see most often are, for example, in consumer goods, are something like promotions, different types of promotions, or that certain products or an increase in pack size are given for free. In telecommunications, we often see that, or in other software solutions, we see that certain products are highlighted, and this has a measurable effect on the choice of customers. And all of these effects can be modeled. And I think what's important to that is, and this is something that we're working on in a very large study, is to parameterize these effects. As you saw in the wine example, it of course makes a large difference how many % of customers move from one product to the other when these behavioral effects apply. And what we are doing is we're parameterizing these effects with a global study and across countries. And there we see, and I think this is also important, that and we have one example here, is that these effects can be very different across countries, and some might not even work in some countries for some reasons that we're working on to better understand. So very simple example here. So you have two mobile plans that are identical, and the only difference is that this one has 3 GB, the other one has 5, and the cheaper plan costs after month 6 costs 10 euros, the other costs 15 euros, so that's identical. And we showed half of participants the case where in the first month you paid in both cases 1 euro, and in case B you got the first 6 months for free. So this would be an example of the power of free. If you give something away for free, that makes a product much more attractive because it doesn't have a downside in this one attribute. And this should push many customers to the 5 gigabyte versus the 3 gigabyte in case B compared to case A. And this we saw here in Germany, where we have a share of the more expensive plan of 52% in case A and 62 in the second, so an increase of 10 percentage points. But for example, in Spain and France, we saw that fewer people actually went for the free plan here, which isn't rational, but isn't rational in the wrong or the unexpected direction. So it might be that they are suspicious of free products, but this is just an example to highlight how difficult it can be to actually work with these behavioral effects. And we found that the pure behavioral effects like this one here, they are much more unstable than the more rational effect. So the difference between 3 and 5 gigabyte. And these are important to know, and it's important to parameterize a model for a specific case to get the proper result. So it's not sufficient just to know the effect, but it's to actually use it, you have to know the parameters. And I think one last step before we go to the question Q&A is, of course, and this is also something that we're working on, is how do these effects relate to each other? So if you have more than one behavioral effect, can you just add them up? Do they multiply? Do they support each other, or do they weaken each other? And here we have an example that we found on German television that essentially uses everything that we can at least think of as behavioral effects. So they have the trust effect here. So they have a guarantee, the power of free. Many times all these things are for free. They have price anchors 100, so they go over the price threshold, so it's not 99.99 to establish the value, and then they have this large discount here. They put you under time pressure, so only 19 more seconds to call. So they're using quite a large number of behavioral effects, but it's I think it's a bit like medicine. So if you use too much of it, it loses some of its value, and that's something we're seeing. And what we're having a project on is to better understand how these behavioral effects add up, and what's at what level the utility of certain effect diminishes and become useless as a pricing tool, to also help our customers get the right level of behavioral effects in here.
Perfect.
Cool.
Thanks a lot, Ingo. I know that we're quite close to 3:30, but we already have some questions in the chat, so I didn't want to keep those back. If we're going to stick around for answering all of these questions, so if you have to go at 3:30 sharp, you will receive the full recording in your email. So feel free to look at those as well. Yeah, so first question comes from Gutlai. Is there a difference in implementation for B2C and B2B customers? I'm assuming, does the behavioral effect work the same in both instances?
So it's same but different. So it definitely also applies to B2B. For one, there are people that make decisions in the B2B context as well. And also organizations usually put an extra layer of decision rules into the organization. So for example, when an organization has thresholds where up to which people can make decisions without asking their supervisors, then that of course acts very similar to a price threshold, the 10 euros that we mentioned before. So if someone can make a decision, or if someone can give a discount of up to 20% and has to ask his boss, if he goes above 20, then it's much easier to get the 20% than anything above. Or if someone has a budget, I don't know, $10,000, and above that they have to ask for have to ask their boss, then it's much easier to get the 10,000 than 12. So yes, company in B2B, there are behavioral effects. Because people are making decisions, and two, the organization itself puts an extra layer of behavior into place that's relevant. And from our experience, we know that individuals care much more about a lower price when making a purchase decision, whereas organizations care more about that the process is proper, so that sales or procurement got their proper discount on the original price, and overall all the actors in the decision process essentially fulfilled their role. It's somewhat less important what the actual price is in the end, rather than that the process was proper.
Great. So I think that also covers Arthur's question. He's asking, is this sort of approach applicable for most of the industries, or is it mostly related to certain niche markets? My takeaway here would be wherever people are making decisions, they're behaving irrationally. And then, of course, the context decides on the weighing of different effects, right? So
yeah,
in telco, there will be others
what we're seeing is in purchasing decisions where people know what they want. So for example, in telco, we see that where people have a good understanding of how much data volume they need per month. It's much more difficult to push them above that. If they know I need 10 gigabytes enough for me in a month, it's much more difficult to push them with a discount or anything else or something else above 10 than in industries like the wine example, where people don't really know what they want or what good quality is. So there are industry differences. Also in insurance, for example, you see that people tend to buy more than they need because they just want to make sure that they have the proper product when they have an accident, for example. So it's where people know how much they need. They behave much more rationally. That's what we're seeing.
Makes sense. So I think Kutla has the last question. What would be the effect if we had dynamic pricing, e.g. changing price points with time for good, better, and best product? So how do they relate to this?
That certainly makes it more difficult to come to the right price. It always seems to me that when prices change a lot, that people wait for a low price, and it certainly makes the decision more difficult if people have a sense of that prices are changing over time. If I'm looking at your offer and I see the different prices and the offers, and I don't know if that will change over time or what it has been yesterday or what it will be tomorrow, then my decision should be the same. If I'm aware of these changes, then it makes the decision process more difficult, because I always have to consider, is this too expensive, or can I get a better deal tomorrow? So if in something like airlines, I think where people know that there's dynamic pricing at play, it makes the decision process much more difficult, and with that also the price optimization much more difficult.
Okay, cool. I think we have some more slides just in case you want to reach out. We can also take some questions by email. I wrote in the chat, we're also looking for new ideas about the next webinar topics. So if you're interested in more method and theory, just put 1 into the chat. If you want more industry specific deep dives, just put number 2. And if you want like some case study deep dives, like diving deeper into the pricing of Netflix, you can indicate that as well. And of course, just send us an email if you're interested in any specific questions. The upcoming webinars will be industry deep dives. So in 23rd of April, we will have one on the telco industry. And then on May 14th, we will have one on revenue management in the future. So we'll have some deep dives for CPG customers there. So Ingo, did I forget anything, or did we have everything covered?
No. If no, so we have these industry specifics coming up, but if there's something you would like us to talk about, and we feel competent to talk about it, then we'll have time to put something in between. That's certainly something we can do.
Sounds good. Perfect. Then thanks everyone for all the questions, and see you next time. And if you have any remaining questions, just shoot us an email, and we're happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. Have a good weekend.